Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming today or joining us today. I would first like to give a very warm welcome. Technicalities. I would very much like to give a warm welcome to Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Norway to Slovakia, His Excellency Mr. Terje Theodor Nervika, who was very kind to join us today. I also welcome all of you who are here and our participants. I will introduce by the respective panels later on throughout today. My name is Alena Krentaska, and I am here today on behalf of Human Rights Institute, Inštitút ľudských práv, civic association that the name suggests deals with human rights issues, part of which and a pillar of our work is also women's rights. Today's conference title is Gender Equality Promotion, Slovak and Norwegian Experience. And this is an opening conference of our project, Gender Equality Promotion, that was selected, supported, and financed by Norwegian grants, 2014-2021, and co-financed by the Slovak budget. We are very happy and thankful for this support. We will, throughout the day, hear how does gender equality looks like in Slovakia. We will first look at some selected indicators and partially how the legislation looks like, but mainly how the implementations look like and how the outputs, how the reality looks like. And we will then move on comparing or seeing how is the situation today and state of the art today in Norway. Also outlining and highlighting the challenges, if there are any, also in Norway. And after lunch break, we will continue with seeing how Norwegians used the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, which is a long title of what we know as the Istanbul Convention that Slovakia has not ratified yet, unfortunately. Each session will take approximately 30 minutes for a lecture, and then you all will have a chance to ask questions. You are very welcome to pose questions. Those of you who are here, I will go around with a microphone. For those of you who follow us online, feel free to ask your questions via Q&A option in the Zoom, which is down on the bottom of your screen, or in the comments in YouTube, and we will transfer them here and ask on behalf of you. On a technical note, throughout the day, the coffee break is available for you who are here. Feel free to use it, go out and grab a little meal or a drink that you need. We will have a proper lunch in the middle. I wish all of us a fruitful event, and I would now like to give floor to His Excellency to open this event for us.
Thank you. Dobrý deň. As I understand, this is also transmitted to viewers online. So I guess that is the camera. Okay. Dear friends, I am glad I can greet you on this day when you can start the activities of the new project. As you might know, the work-life balance, gender equality, and combating gender-based violence belong to the top priorities within the Norway grants. In previous periods of the grants, we have focused on women's shelter, counseling centers, education of specialized personnel, and awareness raising campaigns on the problem of violence against women. In this period of the grants, a new focus area has been added to the program, the work-life balance. Our aim is to improve the work-life balance and address the main gender inequality issues. At the same time, we are not forgetting awareness rising about gender equality and work-life balance in society, and specifically among young people. The whole society has to be aware and to understand the situation of women and become more sensitive to their needs. The exchange of knowledge and experience between actors is essential to find a common approach on how to reach these goals. Both donor and the beneficiary countries can benefit by sharing experience and best practices. It is very positive that you have two very well qualified Norwegian partners for your projects, the Kun Center for Equality and Diversity. And I'm happy to say that she comes from the same town as me in Norway. And it's not very often that you meet them in these circumstances. And also Holes Distinct. And I'm also happy to say that Arnie and me, we have cooperated a lot in 10, 15 years ago on the same issues, and especially on this work balance sheet that has been very important. So I'm sure that your cooperation will be very enriching for all involved. Finally, we are pleased by the big interest in the call for supporting the organization's activity in the area of work-life balance in Slovakia. And of course, my congratulations on your success with your project application. I am confident that despite the time constraints, you will be able to carry out all the planned activities and achieve good results. I wish you good luck in all your efforts, and have a pekni then, all of you. Unfortunately, I have to leave you quite soon because I have another meeting waiting. So, and this is an extremely busy day. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nervika, for your kind words. I would now like to go in medias res and ask Ms. Barbara Holubová to join us. Barbara Holubová is a researcher from Central European Labour Studies Institute, or CELSI for short, and focuses on social research in the areas such as labour markets, social policies, gender equality, and has participated in a number of international and national research projects in these areas. Please.
Can I stay? Oh, hopefully it will be good. Oh, okay. Can I probably
I'll try again.
So if you allow, I will stay in mask because my husband today didn't feel very well. So only as prevention to not do something wrong. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. It is very an honor for me to present my institute, but also our outcomes of some projects. I was considering really to pick up the most interesting outcomes or results of our projects and studies that might be also interesting for your project, but also for the overall, to have a really good overview what is going on in terms of gender equality in Slovakia. It is, of course, the gender equality is a very complex problem. I picked some of the aspects that, according to me, are really high, risky areas where the gender equality is widening, not closing. Please. I picked up some data because I'm a sociologist and I like to have an evidence, what is going on in the society. And I picked some of the comparable indicators in terms of Slovakia and Norway. And as you can see, there is a very wide diversity in terms of our indicators. Norway is definitely doing better in most of the indicators. And I know that for Slovakia and also for the Eastern countries, Norway and also the Nordic countries are an example how to do it, how to really to proceed further and be inspired. I know also in the campaigns and your policies and everything. It is worth to say that when we have been trying to explain what is your success factor most, I know that we spoke also about the climate, that from the beginning of your constitutional establishment of your state, you have been very equal. We really focus on the equality as such and really proceed very consistently really to reach it. We also, but somehow we didn't get to these good numbers as you. So probably I will also ask in details how to improve our legislation, our climate, and really to put it in practice, not only in papers. Because as you can see, for example, gender overall earnings gap, you are really doing better. Gender employment gap, so the numbers are showing that something is wrong. Despite that we have legislation and policies. I will speak on this on the next slide. Please, next. As I already indicated, so we have a constitution. We have there a very good article number 12, that equality between human beings in dignity and rights and prohibition of discrimination on the ground of sex. Probably, I will not open the differences between sex and gender now. At least we are happy that we have the ground of sex in the constitution, because probably if we would like to include also gender, it might be very complicated. And I suppose that there is no political will to widen this concept. So we also have the root or in the constitution that the intersectional approach is also integrated there. So we're speaking about discrimination on the ground of race, color of skin, language, faith, and religion. So everything is there. So we are trying somehow also to transpose this in specific acts and legislation, but also in policies. So, I'm in this area for already 20 years, and I know what was already done, what was planned. So many strategies, action plans, so many documents and regulations. But when speaking about the data, there is a very, very broad divide, but somehow it is not functional, So probably it is also relevant to say that in the preamble of the Constitution, we are really calling for the serial method, spiritual heritage. So according to me, this is something, okay, we know we have this history, but according to me, this is opening the space to broad conservative support. So we are our country is not relying on any ideology or religion, but this preamble or this wording in this constitution might be or is, according to me, misused for widening this or applying this conservative and religion ideology on gender equality principles. Next slide, please. So another relevant act is, of course, the Anti-Discrimination Act, who is really transferring the International Anti-Discrimination EU Directive. We have everything there, but the latest analysis, legal analysis of the act, and also according to the CEDA committee, they are saying that we are missing some some definitions in the act. For example, when speaking about multiply discrimination is missing, but also the women's access to justice is limited. So it was already indicated in many recommendations of the international committees, and also in the legal analysis from the European Commission that, yes, you have everything there, but the access to justice is really very, very scarce. Even in the act, we have also a temporary balancing measures. A good message is that some of the temporary balancing measures are already used, but usually in terms of any projects that are focusing, for example, on Romanian children or Romanian women or employment. But as such, it is not called as temporary balancing measures. So it is quite a hidden issue. But for example, when you are reading the reports from the National Institute for Human Rights, the Central National Institution, they already mentioned that, okay, so some of the measures, balancing measures have been applied with some success. But in terms of, for example, any women's quota or I don't know, any measures supporting women, for example, in the political decision-making policies, it was not applied. Next slide. So the last essential legislation is the labor code. It is also transforming all the main principles of gender equality, the right to equal treatment concerning access to employment, remuneration, and so on. We have also a section 2 with the equal pay for equal work and work of equal value. Unfortunately, Slovakia, as I know, so far didn't apply or didn't plan to apply any wage transparency policies. I know that currently there is in the European Parliament a directive speaking about the transparency policies that some of the companies and also state institutions will have to publish the gender audit of payment. But so far, I don't know how it will be applied in Slovakia. I know there is a quite huge resistance to this because it is seen as an administrative burden. So probably I don't know how we will apply this directive if it will be approved in the European Parliament. Next slide. So when speaking about institutional infrastructure, you probably know that from the beginning of our establishment of our state in the 90s, it was the machinery or the institutions that should coordinate or have been responsible for promotion of gender equality have been struggling with canceling and renaming even from the beginning. So I remember that it was only a small department in the Ministry of Social Affairs called Interest or Department for Affairs of Women. Then it was broadened to gender equality. I know that when we enjoyed the European Union, there was a very broad policy and demands how this gender equality policy should look like, also in terms of infrastructure. So I know that this was a very good area, a good time really to establish the most of the machinery and administrative focal points and so on. But after the accession, it was changed again. So we have been trying really to expand the gender equality to equal opportunities and also to other principles. So the departments have broadened their agenda. And according to me, it was the gender equality as such was not so strong as the principle of equal opportunities. You know, I'm okay with the equal opportunities concept, but when you are in a state where the gender equality is hampering, and really you know the data, it is quite questionable if to broaden the concept gender equality to equal opportunity. So after the last elections, the whole administration changed, a new ministry came, and it was obvious that they will change the approach to gender equality. Gender as such, probably you know, was really forbidden to use in any documents. All the documents, but also departments have to change their name, title to Department of Equality between Women and Men and Equal Opportunities. And also, I know that some of the programs and financial mechanism have been stopped and changed to another kind of criteria who can apply and what should be supported by the finances. I'm a member of the National Committee for Equality between Women and Men, previous Committee for Gender Equality, and I know what is actually how the approach changed. We know that now some of the issues are not in the discussion, and we have been trying to compile the strategy, the new strategy for gender equality. Of course, it is strategy for equality between women and men, but it was obvious that it will be the approach change because it is now not supporting women as such. It is supporting women within the family. So the strength to traditional family is obvious in the task. And for example, we wanted to put there also the reproductive rights. It is not that it was canceled, you know. So some of the topics have been really put out. It was not possible to draft there any task or any progress. And of course, the department also coordinated or should coordinate the gender-based violence policies. You know that Slovakia didn't ratify the Istanbul Convention. It is really a stopped policy. Now we are in the second year of drafting the National Action Plan for violence against women, and we now know that there might be big issues because they want to broaden it to the domestic violence or to violence within the family. So we are really trying to stay or to put it only on women because we know that when we broaden this topic, women will be lost in the broader topics. So next slide. So probably it is necessary to also indicate some of the political developments which are determining what is going on and what probably will be done in the next 2 years. So we know that from the 2012, 2014, a very strong anti-gender movement groups really try to change the approach, and they succeeded in penetrating in political parties, even in government. And they have the majority in our parliament. So, for example, when we want to, when the report from the Institute for Labor Rights wanted to present its annual report, it was not taken into consideration because it was also suggesting that there might be any human rights violating in terms of women's reproductive rights, but also of LGBT community. So there is a tension between the labor rights organizations, even state organizations, and the parliament. So as I already mentioned, the election in 2020 changed the approach. Now the gender equality or term gender is forbidden, and the administration in the department changed. I know that most of the experts from the department left, and there are new experts. I know that they are really struggling with number of personals because it was now the focus is on supporting of women or so supporting of families, and many new strategies are in the preparation, but others, for example, as the National Action Plan for Gender-Based Violence is now really stalled. Next slide. So zoom to some of the aspects that, according to me, might be also relevant for the next campaign or for the next projects in Slovakia. Sorry, because there was a table. It is not there. And also the pictures are not there. Okay, never mind, I will try to explain probably this. So next slide, please. So in 2019 to 2021, we implemented a project focused on gender pay gaps in public services. And it was very interesting to see that despite that we have a very regulated, probably also in Norway, very regulated pay in public services in terms in education, public administration, and healthcare. I remember now that in 2017, the gap in healthcare, public healthcare was 27%. So it is, despite these regulations, there are gaps even in the public sector. And we have been trying to explain how the austerity measures relating to the first crisis in 2018 determined the gaps, if they contributed to the widening of the gaps or not. And we know it is also very interesting because now is the same kind of development going in Slovakia. So we are again freezing the payments in public services. We know that the recruitment is also freeze, so the development might also repeat again after these measures relating to pandemic. So we know that, for example, the pay freeze stayed from 2009, and it happens, for example, that in all the public services, some of the pay or salaries have been below the statutory minimum wage. So now it is again the case. So it was I know there have been some strikes, some actions from the trade unions really to try to increase the pay, at least at the level of minimum wage. They succeeded, but now it was the minimum wage increased, but the pay didn't change. So it might be that in terms of gender pay gaps, because also men are struggling. So it might be that there will be also a period, probably 2 years, that the gender pay gap will close because the pay of men is deteriorating. But then it will, when the economy will increase, the gender pay gaps will also increase again. So this probably might be the same development as in the aftermath of the 2009 crisis. And I don't know how to change this development because the current policy is definitely doing the same. So the investments in public expenditure probably might be somehow limit because the debt is really widening, So now we are probably in the same progress. We also focused in one of our project, an article about on the poverty of in Slovakia, women's poverty in Slovakia. And I remember that when speaking about any international conferences, Slovakia is presented as a country where the 16% percentage population in the risk of poverty and social inclusion is somehow a good country because of the higher average EU average percentage, but the devil is in the details, because when you go deeper in some of the age groups or specific households, you will see that the numbers are very, very bad. For example, when speaking about people aged over 60. Now we see that really the number of women, but also the percentage is higher than of men, and according to the most vulnerable groups are the households with single parents with at least one child, and as you can see, the percentage of this type of household in poverty and social inclusion is very high through all the years that we measured the poverty. So now it was in 19 it was decreasing, but 40% households with mostly women are still in poverty. I know that there are already some activists or non-governmental organizations that are really lobbying for specific policies for this kind of families. And you know, this is quite a paradox, because now we have the second year of a government that is declaratory of supporting family, but the numbers of this kind of household are still bad. So no, something is not going well. And then speaking another group of very vulnerable women are the Romani women, and there are special surveys really focusing on the Romani women from the marginalized communities, and we know that they are most of their life they are out of the labor market. They have no chance really with all the children to be paid for their work. Next slide. So we also investigated how the demands for labor market flexibility can contribute to the precarious work. And we know that when speaking about precarious work, there are some definitions. According to Eurostat, it is measured very in a narrow sense, but we looked at the conceptual or multidimensional is a big issue now in the workplace, but we also know that the precarious work is very a gendered phenomenon, because it would be, for example, it was a quite high expectations that when women stay at home and will work from home, the gender balance or work-life balance will increase, and the gender roles in caring will be more balanced, but you know, according to opinions or values that are in our families and in our traditional families, it is very hard for women to change the roles in the families. And we know that it is not happening. Of course, in some of the population groups might, but in most of the families, the gender roles in terms of caring and chores stay the same. So according to us, these gender settings in families really contribute to the even more precarious work when speaking about reconciling the home office, caring, cooking, studying with children. So we don't have a very concrete data yet, but I know that from the anecdotal experiences and stories, we know that what happened women when the kindergartens and schools have been closed, it was really horrible. And we know that the impact on mental health is very huge. Next slide. So previous months, we submitted a very broad report for European Commission on gender balance, and it was structured in this way, that we focused on flexible work arrangement, but also early childhood kindergartens, and also long-term care, and parental and maternal leaves. And these are the outcomes for the dimension of flexible work arrangement. So from the data, we know that flexible working arrangements have very little impact on work-life balance. So it is there is a huge expectation that, for example, if we would have, we'll have more part-time jobs, that the situation will be better. According to the data, it will be probably not the case. So when speaking about part-timers, now the number is very, very, very low, 6% of women or 2% of men. And working from home, it is really a privilege for a very, very small group of people, because it is the structure of economy is not allowing this. No, so when speaking about that the home office or working from home might be a benefit, it is a very minor group of people who can benefit from this. So you can see that the data, these are the data from Slovakia, and these are the European average, so it is a very wide gap between the average number of people or percentage of people working from home. So, and when looking at this is a Eurofund quality of life survey, and we know that 1/3 of Slovak population is struggling to balance work and family obligations. And you can imagine that there is and also a gender gap. So more women are really struggling with balancing the family obligation. And I know that ministry is preparing a comprehensive work-life strategy still, but this is another strategy that the implementation might be hampered by the kind of structure of economy, and also the kind of companies and employers that are operating in Slovakia. Next slide. So when speaking about access to early childhood education and care, we explored another barriers. Currently, we have a dual system in Slovakia. We have nurseries that are established as social services in the Ministry of Social Affairs. And then we have kindergartens that are established by the municipalities or by the state Ministry of Education. And these two kinds of policies are not coordinating together very well. So, and this is, of course, an issue that the participation of early childhood education is one of the lowest in Slovakia. We have very few children to age 3 that are in the nurseries because of the lack of the accessibility. Now we know that there are some primary nurseries that are very expensive for usual people. And when speaking about kindergartens, from the September of 2021, this year, the 5-year-old children have attend compulsory the kindergartens. And what happens that the children that are younger, from the 3 to and 4, might be not in the kindergartens because of the lack of capacity. I know that ministry is really pushing the municipalities to expand the capacity of the kindergartens, but from the September, all the children already should be in the kindergartens. I know some areas when speaking about children from Romani segregated communities, they are attending the preschool kindergartens in shifts. So some children are going in the morning and some children in the afternoon. So this is really a failure of planning, really to plan the capacity of kindergartens. Yes, you can go further. When speaking about long-term care, I know that the policy is struggling because this is a interministerial issue between Ministry of Social Affairs and Ministry of Healthcare, and there have been already several strategies, several legislation proposed. It was not approved because of the lack of agreement whose responsibility should it be. I hope that now, because we are in the middle of restructuring of the healthcare facilities, and there are some ideas that some of the healthcare hospital will be transformed to long-term care facilities. So I hope that it will be helpful, really, because as you can see, the number of applicants for residential LTC is increasing each year. Now we have 11,000 people who are really applying, and I know that they are in the register for 5 and even more years because of the lack of capacity. Next slide. So to work-life balance agenda, we have to speak also about parental and paternity leave. The maternity and paternity leaves are one of the generous in a European in terms of length and also generosity. But I have to mention that the payment replacement of the maternal benefit is now 75%. So it is on the level of an average income, but it is only for some of the women, because if you, for example, are self-employed or you have official minimum wage, the benefit is much lower. So we suppose that many women are really receiving very low maternity benefit, and from the 2011 also men can be beneficiaries of the maternal benefit, and it is also calculated from their previous income. And it happens because the salaries of men are usually higher than men, that they are receiving also higher benefit. And in the legislation, you can also simultaneously care for the child, but also work. And this is a study from the Institute of Financial, I don't know, Ministry of Financial, and they explored that 40% of men being on maternal leave and beneficiaries of maternal benefit are working. And of course, the Social Insurance Agency really tried to explain how it is possible, because the benefit is determined that you have to care for the child personally, and some of the men even haven't been in Slovakia, so they have been working abroad. They have been, for example, going to military mission, and despite that, they applied for the beneficiary. So some of the cases have been investigated, going to court, and the social agency really try to determine that if you are beneficiary for the maternity benefit, you have to care personally for the child, because usually it was also another woman or grandma, or I don't know, So this is an example that if you have these policies, if you have this system set, it doesn't mean that it will really work in the purpose as it was set. So the goal was really to increase the caring fathers, and it might be happen that it was not the case. Next slide. So I have to say that this is not a project that was done by CELSI, but it was done for the organization Freedom of Choice. because now I suppose it is the 19th proposal in Parliament now in the last 2 years that is really trying to restrict the accessibility to legal abortion. And we try to really to explore how is the accessibility of legal abortion in Slovakia, or because we know that some of the hospitals or care or healthcare facilities are refusing to provide this service because of their personal and religion beliefs. And it is quite widespread. We found out that we mapped 70 facilities, and we know that it is 34% of these facilities are refusing to provide legal abortion. So, for example, in some regions in Eastern Europe, there have been mapped 10 hospitals, and 8 of them are refusing. So, you know, the women from these regions are forced to travel 100 or 500 kilometers to Bratislava or even to Austria to get the service. So we also found that when speaking about financial availability, probably you know we have to pay for this reproductive service, and the average price is 400 and something, and it is when we saw it or calculated as a percentage of a disposable month's income, it is 68%. So you imagine you are in family with 2 adults, 2 children, and it happens because, of course, we also have to pay for the anti-conception devices. So it happens that the women really can't afford the 3rd child and want to get to get this service, and you have to pay really 68% of your month's income. So we suppose that the financial availability is very limited. Next slide. So here is a graph ranking from the Gender Equality Index. We are now in the 55-point score out of 10 points. The ranking has dropped by 2 places since 2010. The most problematic issues that are drawing our score down is women's representation in decision-making positions. Now, I suppose in the parliament there are 20%, 22% of women. And of course, the second dimension is that this disproportionate allocation of time spent on domestic work is another issue that is really drawing the score down in Slovakia. Next slide. So very quickly, conclusions. So the essential legislation is in place, but the implementation and enforcement is very, very, very limited. The machinery for gender equality remained, but it is really also limited in terms of approach, but also in terms of expert resources. The approach or the focus is now on the support of traditional family and inherently the natural role of women. So I suppose that most of the policies will really focus on prevention of divorce or support of broad families and so on. The gender pay gap probably will widen in the aftermath of COVID austerities. The policies try to address some vulnerable groups on poverty, but so far it is without any strong impact. The lack of early childhood care and long-term is really pushing women out of the labor market. Flexible arrangements are not utilized for many, many reasons, of course, and that there are very, I saw that it is a very empty premises that if we, for example, increase the flexible arrangements, the work-life balance or the number of women will in the labor market will increase. So the maternal and paternal leaves are generous, but too lengths, and there are also ideas that the length of the maternity and parental leave is really also putting or pushing women out of the labor market. Top of that, there are attacks on already restricted reproductive services, and all of this is really reflecting in the Gender Equality Index, and the closing of gender gaps has been really slowed down in the recent 5 years at least. Thank you very much.
If there's any question on the floor now, I will pass the microphone around.
Thank you. Okay, it's more some numbers. I saw that you referred to Norwegian pay gap, gender-based, and I checked before I came here that it's not as large as you mentioned. It is 10.5 point now difference when you have corrected for part-time and men's bonuses and all that. Then I have one question, and I'm going to speak upon that, regarding the mother's maternal leave, 3 years here in Slovakia. That is quite unbelievable, actually, because, as you said, you push women out of work. What is the general attitude towards that? What is a general public attitude to have a shorter paternal and maternal leave? We call it parental leave, gender neutral, with a higher level of funding or refunding, and building more daycares for small children, 0 to 3 years. I know you have a very low status on that, but I'm curious about the general attitude towards the so-called maternal leave and the daycare building.
Thank you very much for the questions. In terms of the gender pay gap, I don't know if you refer to the overall gender pay gap or the average unadjusted form, because, you know, I was trying really to compare the comparable data. And in terms of, for example, when you, of course, if you exclude or, sorry, if you exclude or calculate the gender pay gap for equivalent, full-time equivalent, or if you exclude part-time, in terms of Slovakia, it will be very diverse because we don't have so much people in the part-timers. So I can look at the data, what are the differences, because I was very careful really to put the same indicator in the row for Slovakia and Norway. And in terms of the attitudes, you know, the maternal leave is only 6 months. Then we have parental leave by the end of the age of 3 of the child. And usually it would be, I know that, for example, in Bratislava, the women are really trying to get to the labor, to return to labor as soon as possible, because also of the pushing of the employer, but also they want to remain their career and their expertise and so on. And it is really difficult for them to get a kindergarten. So they stay at home. You know, we know many women, especially when they have more than one child, they are really staying at home more than 3 or 4 years because of the kindergartens. If you have a good income, you can put your child or you can hire any babysitting, but it is in Bratislava, it might be the case, but when speaking about Trnava or any rural environment, it is very difficult to hire any personal or any private service for babysitting. And the attitudes are very, very relevant, because we now in Slovakia have, I called it imaginary threshold, that it was also used in the time of socialism, that that children should stay at home by the age of 3. this is a very broad or widespread attitude that it is very good that the children will stay at home. And I remember that we have been dealing with this issue in 2005 already, and really looking at the longitudinal studies, how children going to visiting kindergartens, at least from much earlier age, might be better in educational achievements, also in any social characteristics and so on. But in Slovakia and also in Eastern countries, also in Czech Republic, but also in Hungary and Poland, it is the case that this threshold of 3 years is somehow very, very strange, because some of the medicals are saying, or educational experts are saying, that for some children it is not beneficial to stay at home without any child collective for so long time. So, but you are right that the attitudes are very strange in this. Yes, but it depends, because you have to go deeper and to look at for example, for example, the higher the education, the higher the expectations that, okay, I will return to work as soon as possible. So, but it depends really. Yeah.
Thank you.
What is the unemployment rate in Slovakia, and what I suppose your population is getting older? What do you do to get that people to work?
I don't remember the exact number, but speaking about registered unemployment rate, that is the number who are job seekers, it is now around 6%. And I know it is there are more men in the rate is a little bit higher for men, but you have to see that even before the crisis, there have been already more women in the system, so we have a really quite high long-term unemployment, that people are unemployed more than 1 year. And these are usually the people who have only primary or secondary school, who have really limited skills and doesn't match with the expectations of the labor market. And when speaking about, of course, we are going old. And now there was a new legislation that when you will be 65, you can be released. You will be fired from the employer. And I know that this legislation is already in any challenge of the legislation, but I know that we have also a strategy for active elder people and so on. So there are some policies, but I know that some of the people that have the entitlement for retirement, they try to stay at work at least for some hours because of the low pay of the pension. So if you, for example, will receive only 1/3 of the previous income, really it is impossible really to stay at the same level of quality of life if you have so lower income. So I know that I know, at least in my area in research, that there are researchers 75 old and they are still working because of the pension, so yeah, it might be difficult for some people. And because now the situation is that we are the number of economically active population is going down. So probably also for the elder people, there will be a chance to get employed because of the lack of the workforce.
And you need to have kindergartens.
Yes.
Women coming up.
Yes, exactly. And now I know that there is a huge issue when speaking about lack of healthcare personnel, because, for example, only this year, 1,700 nurses left the market for various reasons. They are going abroad or have been retired. But now the ministry is preparing a strategy how to open the Slovak economy for the healthcare professionals from abroad, because we have been struggling with the diploma recognition, and now they really release the criteria that, and it might happen that, for example, from Ukraine or Moldova, the care chain will really move because many professionals are going to Germany, Austria, also probably Norway, Great Britain, I'm not sure, so it is the care chain or the professional is really moving to, And the CELSI is implementing a very interesting project. It is mostly on social partners in the healthcare. And we mapped the Eastern and Southern countries, what is going on there. And we started before the pandemic. And already in that time, the outrage about the brain drain of the professional to Nordic and Western countries was very huge. And social partners, trade unions, really have been asking, look, we are speaking about European solidarity. This is not a good thing. You are because the countries are investing in education of the healthcare professional, and then he or she is moving elsewhere. And of course, I remember there was an argument from the Netherlands trade unionist and said, you have to forget that something will be changed in this way because we have the freedom of movement, of the workforce. So probably the chains of brain drains will be the same or even worse. But we will also do this. We will do this also for Romanian experts, from Moldova, from Ukraine, probably also from another countries, from Asia. We will see, but we also took this approach really to attract the professionals from another countries.
Thank you for a very enlightening presentation. As a human rights lawyer, I find the arguments against the use of the terms gender equality to be pretty troubling. I also heard the arguments against in terms of it being called gender ideology. For me, that's a very, very empty term. What are the arguments you hear to explain what's meant by gender equality, gender ideology, and how do you argue against those arguments?
I remember that when it started, because it is, of course, not only in Slovakia, but also in Hungary, also in some France, Spain, and so on. I remember that as I first heard, I was very struck because I was trying to find the definition. It was impossible because it was everything and nothing. It really, in the term, there is anti-abortion movements, there are anti-LGBT movements, and also it is really a term that is used and misused for everything what you want to hamper. So, and I remember that the previous administration in the Department of Social Affairs, Department for Gender Equality at that time, was really organizing several roundtables and explaining what is going on, or ask actually what is going on. And I remember that it was obvious that we are not speaking on the same topic, but for example, we got to any agreement on at the meeting, but at the next time, the same people from the conservative NGOs really released a press release with saying that ministry is pushing for gender ideology. I suppose it was a very well organized and also financially supported movement that have been used for some of the politicians to get to power, because this was also the case for the elections. It was really a kind of getting people afraid what might happen if this ideology will apply, I don't know for what areas. And for some of people, this might be the motivation why they elected some of the parties. But now, for example, the ideology is already sometimes we view some of the arguments, but now really because now we are showing the numbers and saying, okay, so you are in the second year of the power. You are now applying for the European structural funds. You have many financial resources to support. And when speaking about, for example, the single parent families, the numbers are still very bad. So when you are supporting at least these single mothers, we want to see any impact. No, so we are actually now using the arguments that, okay, you can support the women also within the family, but we don't see the numbers. No, so this is the case. But it was sometimes it was very unfair, and I know that it was a period of time where the two groups of people have been yelling on each side. It was really disgusting, and now they are actually not talking to each other. Where we have two separate groups of people who know that something happened and try to at least to support some of the groups of women or the strategies or action plan, but sometimes really it is very hard to get to any agreement. Okay.
I would have a short question or a commentary maybe. Also, if CELSI is doing something in this direction, and what I see also from the data you showed us, and also from what we know and our research suggests, is that there is quite a deep dividing line in this topic in Slovakia across income. It's a bit intersectional, I would even say, that women that are more well off do not share the same issues with women that are less well off. And I would even claim it's much easier for women that are more well off, because precisely those that are well off can afford kindergartens, even if there's not enough of them. They don't run in a lot of troubles that other women do. And this is the most even disgusting part I see is reflected on how Slovak state thinks about it. Although it's a traditional family or conservative government who speaks of traditional family, our social system is based on attracting well-off people to have more children and trying to suppress people with lower incomes to have less children. Entirety of family benefits are based on this idea that those who earn more should get more and those who earn less get less. So even to the point that women who don't work don't get any benefits at all. So do you do any research in this? Because in this I feel that women don't speak the same language even. Like well-off women don't speak the same language as the worse-off women and face completely different problems. And they would share the same problems with men who are less well-off and vice versa.
Yeah, currently in CELSI, we don't have such a project, but because we are dependent on the priorities of the calls that are announced in European mechanisms. But when you are right, because we know that the division or gaps between or within women are widening because, for example, really the women in Bratislava, not all of them, but some of the groups are working for international corporation, and they are really very good in the, and for example, we have several initiatives to putting more women in the IT system and so on. And they are speaking really another language. Then we have women, for example, in smaller towns and in rural settings that are really actually struggling to get a very good paid job or any job because of the really wide gaps in income between the regions. You know, for example, the more you're going to Eastern, the wages are really, I can't imagine really to have such income, and they are really surviving in some way. For example, I know that the minimum wage, minimum subsistence is 200 euros. Being a woman with 2 children, I can't imagine how to survive really in the cities. And most of the benefits, benefits are, or allowances are, it is called, I suppose, meritocracy. So it is, you have to be employed, you have to contribute to social insurance, and then you will get this. This is a criteria really to get to the allowances at all. And when you are, for example, 3 years on maternity leave, and you are proceeding, or you can't get a job, actually you are falling out of the system. So you will get nothing because you didn't have this minimum criteria that you have contributed for a specific period of time in the social insurance. So this happened probably also in the Roma segregated communities, that there is a very dangerous opinion that the people are drawing from the social system, but I know that the people are mostly dropping out of the system from many years. So actually they are, I can't imagine how to really survive in the segregated community. So this is the case, yes. And I remember that it was previous year, there was a new allowances granted to a woman who was pregnant for 4 years. This was in purpose to really to prevent the woman who might be very bad in terms of economic situation, not to go to abortion. But it was also entitled for women who have been contributing in the social insurance. So employed women before the pregnancy. So when speaking about women who might use this 200 euros benefit, they are really not entitled to this, you know. So it was very strange how the settings of this benefit have been approved. So yeah, that's the case.
Thank you very much. We are at the end of our first session about Slovakia. Thank you, Ms. Holubová. And I invite now Agni Hole to take the floor. I will not go into detail of your CV, because it's long and outstanding, but to give an impression, you worked more than 13 years as a Director General of Department of Family Politics, Equality and Anti-Discrimination of the Ministry of Children and Equality of Norway, which could be a first point with which Slovakia could get inspired to get such a ministry. And of course, you participated in various gender equality bodies, oversaw laws, and much more than that. Yes, please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be back in Bratislava. I've been coming here since 2014, actually. Many times. The last time was in 2019 with different purposes. I think I can sit down. Can I do that? My throat is a little bit unclear, but that's due to the Norwegian weather. Okay, thank you for inviting me into the project. I will speak on a national policy level, but then I will go into details if you want me to, and you can ask questions. And I will be happy to answer questions tomorrow night on more specific items. My background is a philosopher, history of economy, and I also have worked in 5 different ministries on the top level and internationally, all the way around. I had the pleasure of observing the OSCE's Human Rights Council for 1 year when I lived and worked in Vienna. I worked with the FRA, FRA, the Human Rights Institute there, EU's agency, and that was amazing. First, I want to give you some clarification on what we talk about when we talk about gender. It's a wider notion than sex. It embraces social, psychological, sexual, and biological aspects of a person's identity. It's not an easy concept. And one person's identity cannot be reduced to one's biology. The bioessence trap, I would call that. So to reach gender equality requires structural reforms in society, economic, legal, ideological. In fact, to change attitudes. GE, I will call it GE, is about both genders or all genders. That is for sure. Historically, women's empowerment has been seen as a core of gender equality due to oppression and lack of human rights, of course, strong stereotyping of women's roles in society. Today is slightly different. You have the intersectionality. We have to speak about that. Multiple discriminations. Since all individuals, and this is important, carry many, many aspects. Biological sex, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, sexual identities, ability or disability, religious affiliation, and so forth. All this we have in Norwegian legal system. And discrimination may be experienced on many, many grounds, for instance, being a minority woman with disabilities, or even an elderly migrant woman with disabilities. Then you have the triple. I was just referring to the OSCE, and I remember the last question asked by our friend here. Many, many times during 2014, representatives from Russia stood up and said, we do not use the concept of gender equality. Then the representatives of Bulgaria stood up and said the same thing, etc. and so forth. And we meet that still in the Council of Europe. We meet it in the United Nations, we meet it in the EU and in the Nordic countries. Not so much in the Nordic countries maybe, and I have experienced it all. And once a Romanian Secretary of State in the ministry, I won't of course mention names, she bent across the table and she told me, there is no such thing as gender equality. And I was invited there to speak upon this subject. So we have some avenues to walk, I believe. Norway, like EU, employs the approach of gender mainstreaming. This is not an easy concept either. That is inclusion of the gender perspective in all societal sectors. In fact, we reckon that the sectors are responsible for producing gender equality with national legal frameworks, shouldering requirements, standards, and equal chances, even affirmative actions. And this has to be transparent. They are obliged to report annually every single entity, a municipality, a regional parliament, a private sector entity, a business, a ministry. And also the municipalities where the services are offered. They have to report digitally annually on all sectors, up to the central authorities, because you have to delegate. To get things done in practice, you cannot sit up there, and I talk of experience, to expect things to happen. Well, Norway's best practices, and you know them, we are on the top score in most global measurements for gender equality. It rests on 3 pillars: a combination of legally fortifying equal chances, welfare measures for families, and affirmative actions with defined outcomes, like quotas. We are not afraid of quotas. Now, a brief history, because you cannot get rid of your history, not Slovakia, not Norway. It's culture and tradition. Sometimes you have to dig into that. The battle for gender equality started early in Norway. In 1814, as was said, all nobility inherited was abolished. In 1854, equal rights to inheritance for sons and daughters were implemented. That's pretty early. In 1888, the new Marriage Act retained women's legal authority and the right to separate property. From 1901 to 1913, women went from very limited voting rights in municipal election to universal suffrage. So we celebrated that some years ago in Norway. And this is interesting. I also had the responsibility for the Marriage Act in the ministries at home. In 1920, the Marriage Act removed the phrase, "A woman must obey her husband," already in 1920. That's why you may, or you could believe in the Norwegian experiences. In 1936, the Worker Protection Act secured mothers 6-week leave before birth and 6 weeks after. Not with universal pay though, that came in 1966, but still. And in 1946, after occupation of 5 years in Norway, the war, the parliament adopted the child allowance from the child is born to 18 years of age. We still have it. It's a cash benefit. This was to combat extreme poverty, and it was paid to the mothers. In 1966, before we struck oil, many people say you have the oil. Well, before we struck oil, 1966, the parliament adopted the National Insurance Act. This is a revolution for women. It was family benefits, elderly care, universal pay for 3-month parental leave. It has increased a parental leave, fully paid. It's increased to 1 year now. I will come back to that. Paid sickness leave, unemployment salaries, 1 year, single parent support, etc. For the first time, women were not completely trapped between childbirth, childcare, and care for the elderly, like my mother was. So in 1975, we had the first National Kindergarten Act, or daycare/kindergarten. Regulated the sector with standards, quality measurements, etc. Before that, we only had 50% coverage of early child care. And when I had my first child in 1977, I only had 3 months paid parental leave and no daycare. So I had to hire someone to go back to my work. It was dreadful. The long road to full coverage to an affordable cost, we have walked. We did reach this goal in 2009. And I also had that responsibility to start with. That is 98% of the children between 0 and 6 years attend early child care/kindergarten. That's among the highest in Europe. And of course, we had the Gender Equality Act in 1979, the Working Environment Act in 1977. They are combined, a very strong bulwark for prohibiting discrimination in work life, family life, all sectors. We set up a national machinery outside the ministries independently to ensure equal opportunities and to raise issues in a semi-court way, a tribunal, if you have experienced discrimination on all grounds. The right to self-determined abortion up to 12 weeks, we got in 1978. That was one of my pride in my youth. And the paid parental leave was expanded over the years up till today, and we introduced the father's quota, earmarked, already in 1993. The father's quota is not transferable to the mothers. Today is 15 weeks, with refunding of your salary up to a certain point. I will come back to that. So we had a lot of reforms from the 80s and up to today. And one important step I want to mention, and Karin is going to speak upon that, that was also my responsibility, the shelter law, crisis centers in 2009. All municipalities did get the duty by law to offer shelter services. And not only to women, but also to boys and men, separate, of course. And another law I'm very proud of is a common marriage law, same-sex couples. We did that in 2009. And you know where I went to learn about that? To Spain. They implemented same-sex marriage law before Norway. It's amazing. It's what Europe does to you. You can learn, you can travel. So, to sum up 150 years of Norwegian gender equality relevant development, I will underscore about 17 or 18 points. The liberal, social democratic political parties with cross-party agreements in parliament. The conservative parties in Norway followed suit after 1970, as to J.E. Liberal parliamentarian tradition since 1884. Legalization of rights since 1814 to 21, up to today. The women's movement, two waves, so to speak, 1890s for the universal vote, and then 60s and 70s, as Karin maybe will speak upon. Civil society has been a key to all this. I think without civil society, we couldn't have done it. A strong trade union movement, independent trade unions, the tripartite agreement between the state, employers, and employees, like the ILO advocates. And that's the way we finance the National Insurance Act with all the benefits. Tax for the employers, membership fee for the employees, and then a third by the state, subsidies. Yes. Then we have the youth organizations, youth branches of political parties, extremely important. And then campaigns for increasing women's part in local, regional, and general elections. We had the first in 1970, a sort of a campaign and a steering group on national level, way out in all, also rural areas. And then we managed to get a lot of women elected in local municipality councils. And then it was called a women's coup. I never saw a men's coup when they have the majority of votes. So this is interesting, but it's some years back. We have a lot of other campaigns too, and I'll be happy to come back to those tomorrow night or today. Of course, strong legal acts, working environment, equality acts. And then we did from 2000, and I'm extremely proud of that. We didn't only ratify all the 9 human rights conventions in the UN. We incorporated full text, 4 of them, into Norwegian law with precedents of national laws. The CEDAW, the CRC, the European Human Rights Convention, and the other ones. And this means that ratifying is not enough. You have to get it into the law. So the courts and everyone else can use it as a source and say, hey, and this has been so important. We have invested in free higher education, and that since the 1960s. Gender research at universities with public funding. I'm very proud of that. Free, totally free. Family benefits with work-life balance being the key here. I see that EU, the Union, has taken upon this as a basic value today in Ursula von der Leyen's program. but it's a long way to go. Then identifying and debunking harmful stereotypes of men and women, unconscious bias as well. That's school books, media, several campaigns over the years, and I'll be happy to tell you about those. A free and critical press focus on gender equality during the last 50 years has done a lot. And then transparency in the use of public funding, anti-corruption, reporting, inspecting. And this combination of social reform, an egalitarian attitude since 1814, strong legal acts, popular movements, open public discussions and dialogue, academic research on equality, and a deep, profound belief in the value of equality for all individuals, regardless of gender, has been a success. Now, I don't say we are there. There are issues like unequal pay for work of equal value per hour, the ILO. And as I mentioned, I checked the data. It is 10.5% less than men, on average, including corrected for part-time and including bonuses in private sector. We have gender-based violence in families, not only violence against women, but gender-based violence in the workplace as well. Sexual harassment at the workplace, a gender-segregated labor market that is not productive in the long run, only to have women as teachers and nurses and men in the private sector. It's not black and white like that, but still it's gender segregated. And we have a lack of gender balance in the upper echelons of private sector management. And we have stereotyping lurking behind services, below services, such as hate speech, digital harassment, sexualization in media and entertainment. And that is why the government in August this year published a new 4-year national action plan. Karin will comment upon that too. It's called Freedom from Violence. It's a prerequisite to enjoy your human rights. 8 ministries supported this, and it is with budget lines and responsibilities and timelines all the way out to the municipalities, all levels of administrations, and including civil sector, NGOs as well. Karin is part of that from day to day. So what is the public toolkit today? We have heard about the Slovak toolkit. I think one of the most unique expression of Norwegian legislation, the duty to perform activities for equality and report annually on equality stated, both in public and private sector. The private sector report to their boards, of course. And this is overlooked by the Ombudsman for equality and anti-discrimination. And we have the discrimination prohibited in all areas of society on the grounds of gender, ethnicity, religion, ability, sexual orientation, sexual identity, and age. And when it comes to gender, it's also prohibited in the family. So you have possibility to take action. For instance, is the local services to use this law. And this act was amended in 2019 to fight sexual harassment after Me Too. Now it's in the law and how to handle it. And of course, the universal generous family benefits and infrastructures. And then, not the least, full coverage of daycare and kindergartens from 0 to 6. You can start when the child is 6 months, of course, to an affordable price. We call it max tax. It's a parliamentary set max pay for daycare and kindergartens, like in Sweden. All children in Norway have a legal right by law to a kindergarten place when turning 1 year. All municipalities have a legal duty to offer such a place. So it's a complementary thing. So as I mentioned, 93% of all children 0 to 3 attend daycare, and 98 in total up to 6 years of age. Now, this is a win-win-win scenario. When we decided to enlarge the daycare sector, the early childcare sector in 2003, with a cross-party agreement in Parliament, and we made this sector grow all over the country from maybe 10,000 employees to 95,000 employees in 2009, and even more today. So good for the children, good for the women, good for creating new jobs and expanding the tax base. And some of the persons working out there in the rural areas, instead of leaving for town, big cities, they got a qualified job in daycare. But at the same time, we had to raise the social status of daycare. We had to do something about the salaries. And this is a very important lesson. And as I said, all national ministries must report on equality status in their sector annually to Parliament with gender disaggregated statistics. So this is for all the national ministries. And doing the job I did for the last 15 years, I oversaw that, looked into that all the ministries did report to Parliament. It's not easy. And each year, the Ministry of Equality and Culture, it's called today, this is going to change, I suppose. We recently had a parliamentary election, so we don't know what kind of government we will have when we get back. Well, anyway, an annual briefing to Parliament each year, followed up by a plenary discussion. And this is public. You can go and listen in Parliament, and it's reported in the papers. Not good enough, but it is still openness and transparency. And the government presents a white paper on gender equality to Parliament every fourth year as a long-term addressing issues not solved. We have done support to NGOs working with this, I would say, these equality activities for a long time, since the 1960s. Today, they are channeled through a directorate, a lower tier of government. Like the institution Karin is represented, KUN, has basic funding from this directorate. A vivid civil sector, as I mentioned, is crucial. So there's also a close state cooperation with employers, associations, and employees, unions. And this is important when it comes to what we call the hearing institute. Whenever we plan a reform or a new act, we put it out on a general hearing for 3 months, it could be 4. And all answers back to the cabinet is published on the website, full transparency of reactions, and women's organizations are really active, coming with good ideas, criticizing, before it goes to Parliament to be adopted. And the Employers Association, we have 3-4 large ones, and the employees unions, we have many, are committed to equality. It's in the main agreement between them, what we call the main agreement, and measure this in annual negotiation on wages, because we have an annual negotiation on wages in all sectors, also in the state level. And gender mainstreaming and J.E. is promoted in private sector. I think it's important to mention that in business sector, since the legal frames are the same for all, as to law, as to family benefits, universal. So the businesses must comply also to the duties of annual report to their boards. And they have set up, the large businesses, medium-sized, wonderful mentor adept programs, and recruiting women and training women to take on leadership. So we did in the public sector. Supporting female leaders to be. It's not legal in Norway to use quotas when you recruit to work. It's only legal to use quotas when you recruit to boardrooms, the board of governors. This is a very important difference, like in the EU. but we have the Gender Balance Act, and that's really one of my prides. In 2003, the Parliament adopted the requirement to have not less than 40% of each gender on the stock exchange noted large businesses. It was implemented in 2005 for the state enterprises owned, and 2008 for the private big businesses on the stock exchange. And we were the first country in the world to do this with sanctions. You can't be dissolved by law if you don't oblige. And I traveled around Europe speaking to the European Parliament. I went to Germany and I met Ursula von der Leyen. I just mentioned this. She was then the Minister of Equality and Family. And she said, never, no, never. And only a few years after, she said, oh, we have to do this in the EU. And the EU has a pending legal action on that, as you know. So now we have 40% of each gender in all large companies noted on the stock exchange. We have about 30% on the other ones, medium-sized and small ones. And I got a number from Alena, 26% women on average in Slovakia. So something can be done, of course. And then again, we have all governmental appointed councils, committees, and expert groups must have 40% of each gender. And sometimes, if you look into Norwegian history, you will see that issues like social affairs, issues like daycare programs, laws, developing strategies, you only had women. That is changed. You now have both genders also in these committees. Of course. And the last point, any public appointed delegation visiting foreign countries shall have gender balance. This is not always easy to meet. I shall agree to that. And you can get an exemption if you can argue well for your case with the Ministry of Equality. But we try. And now we have about 45% female ambassadors. So that's good. So what I want to tell you, the story about government, cabinet, the parliament, the municipalities, and private sector are held accountable by the public, by civil society, the press, the social media. Because the legal framework is in place and we study the numbers and the outcome, they have to be published, right? They are well known among the public, so the authorities cannot avoid being measured. I do not say that all is in place, but this is a very unique and good combination. It's sort of sometimes name and blame. And that's in fact a good thing. A South African friend of mine once said to me, I was sort of taken aback. She said, everyone is for gender equality, but no one is accountable. So we decided to do in Norway to fortify accountability and transparency. This is important. I still have some time to talk about some family issues. The key to gender equality, actually, in many ways, protection of pregnant women in work life, and the right to return to your job after birth and leave of absence. And most women do return after the 1 year parental leave, or minus the 15 weeks for the fathers. Because you get refunded your whole salary up to a certain point. I mentioned the numbers, so we'll get those afterwards. And there has been historical discrimination of pregnant women or women in general in work life in Norway. We still have pregnancy discrimination. Further, it's not allowed by law to ask a woman if she's pregnant or planning to have children when applying for a job, being interviewed. That was a long fight to get that law in place. We got it in place, I think, in 2004 or 5, not before. It takes time. Then you have the legal right, 1 hour paid each day to breastfeed your child. up to 1 year or more, coming back to work, the ILO convention. And you have the small childcare, daycare of high quality. And I say high quality for all. Paid parental leave, I will explain a little bit about that since it's so different between Slovakia and Norway. We call it all parental leave, but we have a quota for mothers, 6 weeks to take it before birth, and the rest of the 15 weeks after. Then we have 15 weeks to be shared by the spouses and 15 weeks for the father, not transferable to mother. If he doesn't take his 15 weeks of refunded paid leave of absence, the family will lose the benefit. So today you get 100% of your salary for 49 weeks, or 80% for 59 weeks, up to what we call 6G. A G is a sort of a basic measurement for how to survive in Norway, I would say. So that would be an annual base of 63,000 euros. Above that, the employer can pay you the rest if your salary is high, like mine did. But it's not by law. So 1G is 106,300 Norwegian kroner, or 10,600 euro. Sorry. If you didn't work before birth, you will have a one-time lump sum to mothers, because both mothers and fathers have to work before birth to get this paid parental leave. 6 months of the last 10 months. Part-time? Yes. Okay. But if you don't, and about 12% of the mothers belonging especially to the migrant families and to uneducated young women, refugees, they did not have the time or capacity to qualify for the paid parental leave. So they get this one-time lump sum. And this is, as I said, 1G, 10,600 euro. You can apply for 1 year of unpaid leave after the parental year. This is by law. You can have the cash benefit to parents if you do not use a public subsidized daycare. This is strange, but it's still there when the child is between 1 and 2. And that's a freedom of choice, actually. So it's probably okay. Per month, you will have 7,500 Norwegian kroner tax-free. 75 euros tax-free, that's a cash benefit. And then you have the child allowance, as I spoke upon, from 1946. That's a cash benefit too, to all children born and resident in Norway, up to 18. If you are a single provider, you receive 1 for 1 extra child. You have support to single providers, support to housing locally and means tested. All these former benefits were universal. But some of these I mentioned now are means tested, like the housing support, subsistence support, etc. Then I think it's important, growing older as Norway is, as all countries in Europe, the pension age are 67. Usually people work until they're 70, 72 or 75 because that is now legal. You will not get sacked. You can retire when you are 62 by special rules if you are very, tired, sick, whatever. But most persons do not do that. When you retire, you have a refunding, if you have worked for 30 years altogether, for 66% of your income when you retire. We also have a tax deduction for families with small children, up to 12 years. So again, I do not say that Norway is completely rid of gender-based discrimination, but legal and economic measures over time have set the norms, the values, the course of welfare, and made them universal, most of them. Because women and men shall not be forced to choose either or between family and work. they shall have the opportunity to choose. And to have that, you have to have measures and benefits and universal systems. It's interesting that all political parties in Norway since the 1970s, we have 9 political parties in parliament, have internal quotas. Nothing to do with the legal stuff, but still, except a right-wing party called the Progress Party. It's interesting. Extremely right-wing called the Progress Party. They do not have a quota for gender balance in their own system. Anyway, so I want to close up with saying most people strongly react against extremism based on anti-feminism, ethnic-based racism, right-wing nationalism, white supremacy thinking. Most people, and remember, we had our experience 22nd of July in 2011. 79 persons were killed by a right-wing radical young man. He even left a manifesto on the internet. It's very difficult for me to speak about it because I have colleagues that lost their sons and daughters. And this man, and he still has followers, he's in prison, of course. He hated women, Muslims, Jews, and LGBTIQ persons. So we have to be alert, given some political and populist trends in Europe and elsewhere. So finally, I will mention the unconscious bias regarding women and girls, persons with disabilities, persons with melanin-rich skin, found almost everywhere. It's creepy. Unconscious bias. There is some research on this phenomenon, and we have to do better to detect it, expose it, and fight the hidden stereotypes. And I'm sure Karin will tell how she works with it. And, as you said, Barbara, unacceptable unconscious bias are also found regarding men as parents and care workers, like they do not have a care gene or something, and like I have a care gene. Ooh. Well, often are these unconscious biases transported by traditions, in media, in advertisement, in school texts. So one of the campaigns we did in the 1980s, as early, we washed all the textbooks for primary school to see how men and women were pictured. It's very interesting. The results were, ooh, and we still have to watch it. So I want to close with a quotation from a Polish friend of mine in Warsaw. He said, you know, like not all wine is good wine just because it's old. Not all cultural and social attitudes and values are good because they are defined as tradition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arnie, for this. Any questions in the room for now or online?
Again, thank you for a very, very informative presentation. You mentioned that gender equality, gender policy is a part of perhaps every ministry. It's integrated into policy making. The Office for High Commissioner for Human Rights has emphasizes the use of human rights indicators, for example, to measure progress, for example, in an area like gender equality. They talk about measuring the structure, whether the structure is there to actually participate, the implementation of a gender equality policy, laws, policies, and so on paper. Then they talk about the actual efforts. I mean, what's really done to implement the structure. And then finally, measuring outcome. Where have you been? How much, for example, within ministries, every 3 to 5 years, are they looking to see whether they've reached outcome indicators they've set or whether they haven't, and so on?
Thank you for the question. Yes. I mentioned the duty to report annually from each entity of any kind, municipalities, regions, businesses, and ministries. So that is done annually. And it is monitored and assessed. In addition to that, we do that reporting to Parliament. And Parliament quite often says, this is not good enough. And each sectorial ministry have the obligation to do surveys and evaluation, between 1 and 4, every 4th year. And to do this, we hire completely independent research agencies. So this is in addition to reporting annually. And the county governor, I didn't mention the county governors. They are appointed by the government, the cabinet, of course. They are in all counties. They have as their task to oversee and comment on how the municipalities report on gender equality. They're not always good enough. She will agree to that. But at least we can charge them with that from the ministries. So all sectorial ministries anchor this reporting duty and doing evaluations and comment and say, okay, we don't know. Why didn't you measure how many fathers and mothers took the parental leave and father's quota? Or why are there so few women owning assets in your municipality? Let's look into that. Please comment on that. And if they don't report on daycare, quality, numbers, how many children, minority children enrolled, they will have the questions and they will not have more money. We are, punishing lower tiers of government as to budgeting. Yes. I forgot to mention one important thing. Low-income families, mostly single providers and migrant families, refugee families, they have 20% free of charge daycare every week, 20% free time. This is now in all the municipalities, but especially for low-income families, not only migrants. It started as that, but it's not for everyone. With a wage, a total income of the family of 530,000 Norwegian kroner, that is 53,000 euro. That is considered a low income in Norway. Then you have a lot more other subsidies like free time in kindergarten. Yeah.
Maybe I can add something there because KUN is a independent foundation, and we can use the laws to ask we can go to the county governor and say, hey, you are obliged to do this and this according to the law and work on gender equality. What do you do? What can we help? We can help you if you don't have the expertise. Yeah.
You have an independent audit. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm impressed that you have actually an auditor, the same as you'd have a financial auditor come in. You have an independent auditor for gender equality. That's terrific. That's really great idea.
I just would add to what Karin says, and you mentioned, it has to be learned, even in Norway. Entities, municipalities, businesses, they have to get into it, get it into their spine. It's as national as it's as common as reporting on diseases or accidents in work life. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the very, very interesting presentation. Now I see the whole picture. You listed all the relevant legislation and mechanisms, how it is implemented. And, now I see that European Union is probably, at least in some way, taking the same approach that, for example, it is conditioned when you want to apply for any, for example, horizon mechanisms in the research, or for example, for the structural funds, you have to have strategy for gender equality. So it is conditioned at least by any financial issues. It is positively issued or motivated. Okay, there are no sanctions, but it seems that at least this kind of mechanisms approach is working also in Slovakia. So, for example, we have this strategy only thanks that it was a condition for the recovery plan funds, you know. So it is quite strange, because I know that they have been a very long period of time or years that that there was a voluntary approach. You can do this. You are invited to do this. And now the approach of European Union is going very, very more strength, more directive. I really welcome it, because I know that the voluntary basis invitation to be a part is not working, at least for Slovakia, definitely not. So there is a risk that it might be only formal, that there will be a strategy, but only on paper, and nothing will be done. I hope that the European Union will also control how the strategy is applying or implementing. This is all very relevant. So very much, thank you very much, because probably it is the same way as it was done in Norway. Yes, thank you.
I would say that one of the prerequisites for doing all this is to not put gender equality or human rights in a silo by itself. Never. It's part of reality in every planning, in all planning. So this is one of the lessons I have learned through 35 years in central government. Never put them in silos. So I think Kari is going to speak a little bit of that when it comes to violence against women and in close relations. So thank you. Yes. No, I would say one more. I said it already, but the combination of legal stuff, values, and always put up the values on the wall, and economic provisions. Those three, then you have it.
If I can just one quick question. Actually, you mentioned that even in Norway there were several things that had to be learned. Were you facing a lot of resistance also from, I don't know, some other local governmental bodies or people? You know, what was the perception?
Oh yes, when we introduced the father's quota, in 1993, that was even before Sweden, 2 years before Sweden. But then, what's that? You know, and then when we introduced the Discrimination Act with sexual identity, sexual, yes, all these things, IQ, it's impossible. That was the religious communities. And then when we introduced the proposal, the legal proposal on common marriage law in 2009, it was implemented in 2010, I got emails into my mailbox in the ministry. You will not have a grave to walk to. Yeah, this is true. But those are few. And I think it's because the deep, profound belief in Norwegian history, as I've told you, that any individual has the rights to enjoy human rights and grow. Yeah. But it has been resistance. Of course it has. And it cost a lot of money. When we expanded the father's quota in a parental leave scheme from 10 weeks to 15 weeks, it was a scream in Parliament. It cost billions. We cannot afford that. Of course we could. And it pays off. It has been tough times, yes.
I can also mention that the municipality, for instance, they don't think gender equality is in their core or the most important. So you have to convince them. You have to use arguments. Yeah.
And use the law.
And the law. Yeah.
I would have one question as well, although I sense the answer will be negative, that this is not in Norway, or this is not happening in Norway. Due to culture and progress you have. But recently, there's been countries, and we see it, that many women politicians or aspiring politicians are targeted by online abuse way more than men. There's even been a study in Great Britain, I believe, where women said that this actually discourages them from running to positions, which I believe is quite a troubling development. I mean, it's 2021, right? Is any of this happening maybe in Nordic countries, or do you know of any countermeasures that you
Well,
would do?
yes, as I spoke upon, to bring things into the open, detect unconscious bias and stereotypes, and detect hate speech. So we have national action plans with budget lines to act against hate speech. We also have action plans to work against online crimes. And there, in fact, there has been a vivid discussion on women, especially young women, and especially young women with minority background, experiences this kind of thing when they stand for office, for election. So this is true. But I would say that our present government, now going away on the 12th of October, they have acted. And in fact, the parliament has asked for it because some of the parliamentary members, 40% women, have experienced it. So what you have to do is to always have it into the open, have some national responsibilities with action plans to engage NGOs, not the least, out all the way out there, and with budget lines. If not, it will only be a few that will take action upon it. And the friends of the man who killed so many people in 2011, they do things like that on the net. I'm sorry, but we have some actions. And going into schools, teaching the pupils, we can talk about that tomorrow evening, that this is not the way to live. Why would you do such a thing? And young men in secondary school have admitted they have done it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is there any more commentary in the room now? If not, thank you very much once again, Arni, for your panel and for the information you brought to us. I call now a break. Welcome back to our conference today. We'll continue with gender equality promotion with Slovak and Norwegian experience. I welcome next to me Karin Houde, who works for KUN, Center for Equality and Diversity, and who is a long-term activist for gender equality and equality as such. Karin, I give you the floor.
Thank you. Actually, I'm also the deputy in KUN Center for Gender Equality and Diversity, which is a 30-year-old independent foundation that works on gender equality, inclusion, and diversity, mainly in Norway, but now also in Europe. This is a picture from the area where our main office is. It's one of the most beautiful places in Norway, close to Lofoten, and it's outside Bodø in the north. KUN's work to combat discrimination and promote equality includes perspectives on gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity, ethnicity, and ability. We do both some research and applied work on information, awareness raising, training, and consultation. About 40% of our budget is from the parliament, and the rest is projects we apply for or assignments from companies, public authorities, municipalities, for instance. Since violence is the ultimate depression on a human being, to work against violence also part of our work. I have fighted violence since all my life, professionally since I was young, volunteer in a shelter in the 80s. This is pictures from different projects KUN are engaged in today. Violence in close relationship, LGBT, guidelines and training. training for violence in close relationships and the knowledge of how could we apply knowledge in the municipalities. We work against violence against the elderly, try to raise awareness and do some training. Digital violence, training and guidelines. We do also some research on, for instance, minority men, social control and psychological health. We know that gender is gendered. While men experience violence on the streets, women experience violence in their home. But it's important to bear in mind that men also experience violence in close relationships. We must fight all kinds of violence, and in this we need different tools. In my presentation, I will address domestic violence, violence against women, and gender-based violence. I will talk about how the Council of Europe's Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence can be applied, why it will be applied, and the goal of this project was to use the experience from each of the Nordic countries to articulate best practices and to strengthen the work in the field. The report, you can see here, the Istanbul Convention, the Nordic Way, looks at the Nordic countries' effort to prevent violence against women and domestic violence, give insight into which strategies and measures the Nordic countries take on implementation of the convention and how they work to prevent violence. This is what I built this presentation on, and it's also the report is available online if you want to read it. The Council of Europe's Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, or for short, the Istanbul Convention, provides us with a particularly good framework for combating violence against women and domestic violence. The convention sets the standards and provides the different countries with a benchmark. This is where our work in this field should be. This means that every country, even countries who have good systems for dealing with domestic violence, will have to do adjustments and make progress to live up to the convention's demands on the 4 pillars: coordinated policies, prosecution, protection, and prevention. There is many reasons why the convention is seen as important in the Nordic countries. First of all the Nordic countries agree that domestic violence, gender-based violence, and violence against women is a problem. And there is a general agreement in the parliament and in society in general that it's important to fight against it. All countries set aside considerable funds to combat this kind of violence, and there is an infrastructure with shelters and program for the victims and program for the perpetrators. The Istanbul Convention is seen as an important tool to reach further. These Nordic have similar stories about how they got where they are today. The new movement, which Arnie talked about also, emerged in the late 1960s and early 1970s as a forceful opinion of women and the struggle against oppression and for an equal place for women in society. Women activists took up these issues, raising awareness on different areas where women were being oppressed, and brought this up for public debate, often in the media. They challenge us, among other things, the division in our societies between the public and the private sphere. and emphasize that violence in the family is not a private matter. This organization have also been important arenas in which women learn organizational and lobbying skills. Parallel with this revitalization of women's organization, female researchers started to collect statistics and data, and they documented women's secondary status in the society. Some women were activists, went into politics, some went into research, and some were active in all three areas. Through the years, a large body of gender research has been produced and informed by the work of women's research and women's organization. Women and some men in politics raised their issue in the parliament and brought about changes in the law. Although there have been frustration and disagreements along the way, it can generally be said that a rather good relationship has developed between non-governmental organizations and the authorities in Norway. A fruitful cooperation has developed between research, non-governmental organization, and the state. An important part of this is that the state provides funding both directly to the organizations and to funds for projects. The media plays also an important role in raising the issue of gender in the public debate, which in turn is important for the forming and creation of values in society. The first shelter in Norway was set up in 1978 by women volunteers. After this, local women's group started shelters in the rest of the country. The state supported the shelter with 50% of operational cost. And this shelter not only gave protection and help to victims, they also started to document and inform about the prevalence of violence against women in the families. By this, women realized that they were not alone to experience this, and this in a connection with more opportunities for women in work life, more women coming out of damaging marriages and save themselves and their children. The public, and especially the women politicians, was interested in this issue and supported it. And in 2009, 30 years after the first, the Crisis Center law stated shelter as a part of public services and a responsibility for the municipalities. A similar story this way, we look at children who experience violence. When I started as a volunteer in a shelter in the 80s, we didn't take so much notice of the children who came with their mother. We had focus on the mothers. But some volunteers saw it, and through research and more knowledge of the impact of violence, we started to see how they struggled. They found that children always are aware of the violence that happens in the family, and to know that your father or stepfather beat your mother is as damaging and sometimes even more damaging for their health and well-being than being beaten themselves. To be a witness to violence is tough for any child. Research found that children that experience violence are more likely to have difficulty in school, abuse drugs or alcohol, act aggressively, suffer from depression or other mental health problems, and engage in criminal behavior as adults. They learn that violence is a way of dealing with life. A turning point was also the Christopher case, where an 8-year-old boy was killed by his stepfather after many years with violence, showing that everybody saw the scars and the marks on this little boy's body. The teacher and the daycare, the teacher in the schools, the police and the hospitals, but nobody did anything and choose to believe the parents' stories or lies. This case has led to services and treatment for children and discussion about their protection in the whole country. Our law on children and parenthood and the Child Service Act include this aspect to prevent and support. For instance, now the police has to actively check and talk with children who is in the house where there is violence. These stories are examples how revealing a problem to get support and knowledge and interest leads to policies and changes in the society. The Istanbul Convention could play an important role here because it bridges the implementation gap. There's a big difference between having a right and getting a right. And the convention shows us how the state should fulfill its human rights obligation to the victims of violence. The convention is very clear on how to formulate for policy in the area. The state must, for example, provide enough shelters, access to restraining order, an effective penal system, etc. In Norway's case, the ratification gave a final push to criminalize stalking, set up comprehensive research programs on violence, strengthening the regional resource center, providing expertise on different kinds of violence, and developed a system for protection of children. One important feature of the convention is that the national parliament shall be involved. The Nordic countries are often perceived as very similar, and in certain aspects we are. We have many of the same structures in place, but when we meet and collaborate, we also see many differences. We also see more clearly some of the different that sets us apart, and this way, by digging in the differences, we can also learn from each other. Now, let me briefly point to what we see as some key points and good example in the work of each country. I start with Denmark. Has a lot of good project-based efforts and less structure. They also focus on many different forms of violence, including the new forms such as stalking and revenge porn, and in this way manage to incorporate more nuanced understandings of the different forms of violence. They also have special attention to young people and violence in their relationships. Finland has a long history of focusing on children's welfare. And in Finland, every school needs to have an action plan for gender equality and a plan against sexual harassment and harassment. Finland, furthermore, is in the process of strengthening shelters and establishing new services as a result of implementing the Istanbul Convention. So they are from children to women and families. Iceland is doing a great job on improving existing structures and seem to have a short way from knowledge to action. There are not so many people, so maybe. They're also good at mainstreaming knowledge and information, and in the sense that school children or anyone in a particular areas get the same information. This way, there is a common point of reference. This is the same strategy that Faroe, Iceland, and Greenland and Åland also work. Norway is doing a lot of good work in professionalizing and improving knowledge within established systems. There are also more research on violence regarding indigenous people like the Sami nation communities, revealing a higher amount of violence here than in other local communities. This fact demands further measures. Like she said, we need shelters for Sami people now. Sweden seems to work very systematically, using established structures and setting 6 national goals for gender equality, which every entity should relate to. There is an emphasis on men's violence against women, and Sweden is the toughest addressing men's gender roles and the structural power aspect of violence. In other words, much good work is being done. One point worth to note is that in all countries, the kindergarten, schools, and the shelters are institutions in a particular good position to do preventive work. Through our research, we saw that the Istanbul Convention may provide us with a framework to aid learning and make it easier to exchange knowledge and experiences between different countries, for instance, by comparing each article. Some have stated that the convention is a human right innovation and has a unique approach to the problem. The Istanbul Convention reflects what we call best practices. It has absorbed what works and has left out what does not work. So to follow it could be effectful. To work against violence is a complex matter, and there is a need to share responsibility, collaborate, and coordinate the work across sectors and in different levels. One of the good examples from the Nordic countries is how the work against violence is organized through interministerial steering groups in each country, which members from all relevant ministries. The countries adopt national action plans which build upon an extensive nationwide support system and vertical delegation to municipalities and regions. The practical implementation is supported by participation of many civil society institutions, organizations, and groups engaged in the field of combating violence against women and enhancing gender equality. Active action plans against violence in Norway today has these names: Freedom from Violence, which Arnie mentioned. There's also an action plan, Freedom from Negative Social Control and Unrelated Violence, and one with Safety, Diversity and Openness for the LGBTQ population. The way, this way of organizing the work can be seen as a way of acknowledging that and dealing with the fact that violence against women and domestic violence is something that affects many different groups of people in several different aspects of life and across many contexts. Interministerial working groups are in a better position to avoid silo mentality and assess and address the problem of violence against women and domestic violence more broadly. The need to share responsibility and collaborate and coordinate the work across sectors is also visible at other levels of the country's organization and coordination of efforts, included in frontline services in the municipality, as the Christopher case revealed. Coordination on different levels can also be seen as an attempt at mainstreaming the work against the forms of violence covered by the Convention. However, there are some risks in dividing coordination across sectors. One such risk is that the solution becomes too fragmented to solve the actual problem. To some extent, this may be the case in all the Nordic countries. The field of domestic violence is divided in at least 3 parts with 3 different authorities. Sexual health is located in the Ministry of Health, who may not be able to do preventive work efficiently. Violence is located in the Ministry of Justice, who may not be able to take sexuality into account sufficiently. Gender policies in general rest in the Ministry of Culture and Equality, and prevention may not to a large extent be located at the Ministry of Education, where teachers may lack the specialized knowledge on both sexuality and violence. How coordination and organization across sectors may fragment a problem is something to bear in mind at all levels of coordinating efforts against violence. Now let's move on to look more closely at prevention. The Istanbul Convention firmly established that gender inequality is both a cause and consequence of violence against women. Article 12 in the Convention on General Obligations states the needs to change social and cultural patterns of behavior and to eradicate prejudice, customs, tradition, and all other practices which are based on the idea of the inferiority of women or on stereotype roles for women and men. The Convention represents the problem of violence against women and domestic violence as a problem of gender inequality. The Nordic countries are marked by a high degree of gender equality. Nevertheless, violence against women is a pressing problem. In fact, a FRA survey from 2014 shows that the Nordic countries have a higher prevalence of violence than the European Union average. This suggests at least two things. The first is, if we follow the convention representation of the problem, the Nordic countries are not as gender equal as they seem. Following the convention, higher prevalence of violence attests to this. Research on sexuality also suggests that gender equality does not enter into the bedroom. This means that there is still a private sphere with relationships and in the home where gender inequality are not necessarily effectively addressed. An alternative and second analysis of this paradox is that the convention representation of the problem overstates the significance of gender inequality. Following this line of reasoning, the higher prevalence of violence in the Nordic countries suggests that the problem of violence against women and domestic violence should be represented in a more complex way. The solution could be a more intersectional approach to the work. In short, intersectionality was coined by critical legal race scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, and the central idea is that inequalities are never a result of a single distinct factor. Rather, inequalities are the result of interaction between different power structures and social locations, such as gender, age, ethnicity, sexuality, geography, migrant status, disability, and so on. Working with an intersectional approach means taking into account different social location and power structures and knowing something about what they may mean in any given context. To some extent, the Nordic countries are doing this already. They report substantial measures for families and children and also focus a lot on honor-based violence. To some extent, there is also focus on people in particular circumstances, such as inmates in prison, asylum seekers, victim trafficking, LGBTQ migrants, marriage migrants, rape victims, young subject to dating violence, indigenous people, national minorities, and persons with disabilities. Yet there is a potential to do more work. People belonging to one or several of these or other groups may live under particular conditions or have certain experiences that mean that mainstream prevention against violence or other measures don't fit. In order to do effective prevention work, all involved parties working to combat violence against women and domestic violence need to know something about the different way violence affects different groups. As noted by Montoya and Augustine, inclusionary intersectional policymaking focuses on recognizing the interplay between different categories, identities, and experiences, yet do not overemphasize or generalize. This highlights one aspect of prevention work in the Nordic countries. There may be an overemphasis on some contextual differences, such as honor-related violence among ethnic minorities, and not enough emphasis on other differences, such as violence against women in national minorities or violence against disabled women. So at the end, I have put on some factors that need to be present in order to implement the Istanbul Convention. First of all, because you need to have laws and the ratification, that's the start. But it's also necessary to have recognition of domestic violence and violence against women as a problem. And knowledge about prevalence and impact of violence and a system to collect data. As we saw, much of the women's movements, the start of the work in Norway or in the Nordic countries was to reveal the prevalence and the impact of violence, the damage, how much damage violence do to individuals and also to the communities. So you need to raise the awareness about damage of violence in the whole public. And I think also that to recognize the Istanbul Convention as a gold standard and build up on knowledge and experience and on what works and what don't, then you don't have to invent the wheel once more. So we can use it. Then it's distribution of responsibilities, because it's not one ministry or one agency that can work against violence, because it's so complex. So this set up an interministerial working group. That could be a good start. And make this action plan with budget lines and delegation to the lower tiers of government. And then our heart child, can you say, is that an English word? Or cooperation between civil society institution, government agency, regional, local authorities, and an at least an intersectional approach addressing possible multiple discriminations. Because working against violence against women and domestic violence means working against women's subordinate position in society, but women have many different experiences. So I sincerely hope that parliaments in all countries of the Council of Europe will ratify, not only sign this convention. Thank you.
Thank you again. Very, very interesting. I'm particularly interested in prevention and what focus you've had perhaps on young boys and young men, for example, and how what kind of measures can be taken to work with them to help them to instill a gender-sensitive approach to their relationships.
First of all, the schools and also the kindergartens need to work with gender roles and address that you could be caring and loving and thoughtful as both a boy or a girl. And we do a lot of work in the kindergartens, and we film the teachers there to let them see how they meet girls and boys different. So you have to start very early and start with the teachers maybe, and then yeah. And that's why I mentioned that the schools and the kindergartens are very good positions to work against violence, because they have all the children there, and they have so many tools, so many, yeah.
Just a follow-up. How do you, what do you do if parents aren't supportive? They find out that you're doing this work and they maybe don't agree with it somehow or other. Are parents generally supportive, do you find?
No, not necessary. I have fathers who has denied their son to walk with a baby stroller. Mm. So yeah, but yeah, stroller. And we have had meetings with the parents and explain about our work, and nobody wants their children to be treated unfair. They wanted the child to be treated as anybody else. So that could be an argument. Mm. To show them why are we doing it. We want equal opportunities for everybody. If your boy has to be tough and not cry, then you take something away from him. a possibility to be caring, a possibility to express his feelings, to develop as a man, a good man. So that's, yeah, so you have to find, you know that this is good for the children, and then you have to tell the parents that, yeah.
Thank you, Karin. I think it's important to mention that the curriculum for educating preschool teachers and early child care workers this curriculum has gender equality within it. Also for primary school teachers and secondary school teachers. So in fact, we practice to train the trainers and the trainers to train the children. This is important. Another thing, and this is by law, Another thing is also by law in the Kindergarten Act, you have a statement of how the cooperation with parents are supposed to be. You have a parents-teacher council. You have a sort of a standing committee elected from the parent-teacher council. And the gender issues are always brought up in these councils and the standing committee meetings, because in Oslo, for instance, 28% of the population is of non-Western origin. You have all religious types, and you have a lot of Muslim families not wanting to partake in this. So you have to discuss it, be open. But this is in the curriculum, and it is in the Daycare Act for the professional staff, to be open, talk about it, and guide. So this is extremely important, that we have mainstreamed gender equality and gender roles into curricula. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me add something there, because if it, even if it is in the curriculum, the teacher they think they do it. So you have to have some experts or some pushing the issue. Like Kun or other organizations coming into the kindergartens and help them implement it. So the law is okay, and all the curriculums and so, but then you need something someone who asks for it and to help daycare kindergartens to do it in, to put it into practice.
But really. Then again, Karin, if you didn't have the law and the curriculum, you wouldn't have done it.
No, that's true.
So again.
I find this is very interesting. Do you solicit the help of prominent professional sports people or entertainers or anything like that to get the message across as well, or do you find that would be ineffective?
Yeah, it could be effective, but I don't know if you reach out to the kindergarten teachers or the parents. You reach out to they who know about it and find this interesting. Yeah.
Since 20 years back, the Norwegian National Association of Sports has had programs for gender equality. And they are supported by state budget sometimes. And they have been very reluctant. Now they are in fact going all in from the children are small, playing football, handball, whatever, soccer, it would be in American. But they have used at least 2 decades to start to train elected persons in the system, their own system, to do this. So still we have a majority of male sports leaders, but it's changing. It has to change, of course. This is particularly important among children with disabilities, among minority children, because some of the minority children don't really have a push from home to go into sports and play outside and fun. So this is a big issue. I would also say that we have a quota in the state support from Parliament to filmmakers, culture, celebrities. We have a quota for disperse money to not only male producers, but also to female producers. And this has been very effective.
Thank you very much for the presentation, very impressive. I remember when you mentioned the Article 12 about the prevention and tradition that are somehow harming women in their superior position. I remember that this special article was really misinterpreted and used really to reject Istanbul Convention in Slovakia. So, you know, I'm wondering because, of course, Nordic countries are probably, they are in other position, in other circumstances. I can really imagine that when, for example, there might be any project that will go to school and propose any kind of this curriculum of gender equality, I can imagine that there might be also very broad resistance of the parents and really any. They will call it gender ideology, definitely. So, you know, because we are really in another position, another situation. And of course, there are some projects funded by Norway grants that are trying to promote gender equality in the proper sense, you know. But in terms of schools, I don't know. What would you propose? How to proceed in Slovakia really to go step by step, really to persuade that gender equality is not ideology, but it is really harming young children in many ways. Because I remember the time that we have been doing this, but probably the effectiveness of such trainings or workshops or any programs have been not so high. So probably because the jump to the gender ideology was very, very quick and very easy in Slovakia. So something was wrong. It was probably not in the mind of the people. The gender equality or the meaning of the gender equality was completely different. So I don't know, what would you do in our shoes? How to proceed, you know?
It's very interesting that you mentioned this point. If you read this report, we have a discussion about this because the Nordic countries interpret this different. They like Denmark, they have a more gender neutral approach, while Sweden are completely in line with this. So it's not black and white. It could be something in between. So this may be the most difficult part of the convention. So that's very interesting to point me out that. But I think that this damage of violence in the families. It's so much research on how children are affected by their parents' fights. So you have this have to be acted on. If you realize, if you see these figures about the damage of violence in the families, and maybe you could go from mention women to mention children, then it could be more applicable, just be pragmatic. So you have to find the way of moving in and to speak with fathers about their daughters, not their wives, but their mothers and the daughters and sisters maybe. Don't you want your daughter to have the same rights and some possibility as your son? Every father will say yes. Yeah, and then you get a way in to discuss further. You don't say woman.
Well, I'm not sure I agree upon that. I would say individuals of each gender, of all genders. Because we had to, when we set up the shelter law in Norway and went to parliament with it, we had to argue for having also shelters for men and boys. Because we have a lot of Muslim families in Norway where gay sons are treated in a horrible way, terrible way. So, and others in Christian communities as well, if you are gay. So the parliament said yes, but the old feminist school, they really yelled at me because I was responsible for proposing the law. And that was a very interesting experience. Yes. So I think also to your question that one need dedicated politicians. One need to vote for the, what should I say, right persons to parliament. You won't have any ratification without that. Of course, you can try to implement, if you have signed the convention, that's a step forward. You can still start to implement it, of course, but you need dedicated politicians in parliament. That's a must. And I don't know how to do it in Slovakia. If you document the harm done by violence in close relations and on children being witness to violence, if you have good numbers, have a journalist to put it on the front page, campaigns on television, on radio, in schools, at universities, in the medical services. You can take one step by step. But the clue in a democracy is to choose the right politicians.
Yeah.
As I know, there is a quite huge consensus when speaking about damage of violence as such in the family and so on. So I suppose that also the current administration is trying to fight against domestic violence, and the damage or consequences are recognized as really, it is really harmful for the children. But for example, when speaking about the way how the violence is explained, what are the factors who are driving that men or anybody else is using violence. This is the difference, because, for example, often it is that violence is individualized. That, for example, he was in stress, he was unemployed, So we are not going further. What are the roots of the violence? That they might be really any gender inequalities, statuses for women that are putting her in this terrible situation. So this is a problem, because now we are explaining the violence as really individualized failure, and that, for example, the man is stronger and higher, and that is why he is using the violence. So it is quite the gender equality status or gender inequalities is not used as explanation, or is try not to be used, because this is the forbidden ideology. Yeah. So this might be a dangerous situation, how the policies and prevention campaigns might be used or misused, because we are still in the situation that gender approach and gender inequality is not perceived as the cause or root of violence, So this is the difference, political difference.
Yeah, but I think this what is violence? I do a lot of training or explaining this. So if you think that bruises and physical violence is violence, then it's more like, then it could be fights. But it's this oppression. It's the violent environment in the family, the psychological violence, the control, So when we talk with young adolescents with this on this, they realize that they are being violated. because they have thought about this is where it should be in relationships. So when they get educated, they realize this is violence. I shouldn't agree with this. I should go away. I should, yeah. So there is also an aspect of information that is needed to the one who's experienced violence as well.
I think it's also really important to get men to sell these values. It's really important. I think building an alliance of men who understand that it's not strong, it's weak to commit domestic violence, gender-based violence, that a strong but sensitive man is really the way to go. I think it's just so strong to get the male alliances in here amongst themselves and with, fellow gender equality advocates.
This project in Sweden, What is a Real Man? I
remember that, yeah.
Yeah.
I recently bought a T-shirt from the summertime. It was made by the Women's Alliance here, and it had a silhouette of a very attractive woman, right? So it's down the front, but there was all kinds of fine print here. And when you got close enough, it was all a statement about domestic violence. But of course, the picture attracted people, and then I said, well, look closer, before you call me a sexist.
I would have a question. You mentioned there's gender equality. What exactly? Gender equality plan for children in schools. Could you tell a bit like what is inside? I mean, not some particular wordings, but what is involved? What such a plan consists of for children?
It's the schools has to say how do they enhance gender equality in the schools. And we are in a project with Finland and Sweden right now where we're going to work with this, and then we want to address the pupils' councils. Every school has a council with the pupils. Is it that?
You mean vad tänker du på föräldrar?
Nej, elevråd.
Elevråd har elected pupils councils.
Yeah, in every school from each. Yeah, and they are going to tell the teachers that what is lacking, what is needed to get equality and anti-discrimination and anti-harassment in schools. What are their experiences and what do they think is needed to fight this?
Great.
Yeah.
So it's not like a set of rules already written, printed in each room, each class.
Oh yes, some
of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. In this school is free of racism.
Okay.
This school is free of harassment of gays.
Okay.
Oh yes, we have a lot of those schools.
Yeah, but we can look into the Finnish. I can provide you with the Finnish action plans because I think, but it's in Finland, so I haven't been into it more directly, but I can find it.
Perfect. That would be for an inspiration for Slovak schools for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a school is a good starting points.
Thank you very much, Karin. If there's no comments for now, I will replace you.
Yes.
And close this day with explaining a bit about the project and what is it based on. I mentioned we run this conference as part of Gender Equality Promotion Project. We are financed by Norwegian funds, and in a particular branch of the funds related to domestic and gender-based violence, as the ambassador explained already, and particularly with the focus on gender equality and work-life balance. Now, to narrow things down a bit more, these projects focus on raising awareness. We are very happy this is a focus because we believe there has to be an effort vested into sensitizing or sensibilizing the public into gender equality so that any mainstreaming of gender equality can be possible. I mean, if the public is opposed, then it is very difficult to implement the policies. The difficulty, and this is where I will talk a bit about the challenges that we face in Slovakia, are manifold, but most importantly, there is an active opposition to the term. There's an active opposition and demonization of gender equality. It was mentioned already. We are one of those countries where the public is flooded by diverse groups that claim that gender equality is some sort of gender ideology. We don't need to speak about the so successful, and it's also because the pro-equality voices are not that heard in Slovakia. It seems that all the groups and groupings and the church who stand against gender equality are better organized, better financed, and stand a bit one front and seem to be very vocal about the issue. It's not a small thing. It's for example, if we made a small research for ourselves at the beginning of drafting the project, we realized that there is no information available on gender equality basically for no one, apart from some particular focused websites and organizations. There is nothing really like widely available on YouTube. If you search social media, if you search YouTube, there is not even an explanatory video on gender equality in Slovak. Everything you find, or the main results you find, are gender ideology results. And although it might not sound an issue for us, it is an issue for younger generations because they look for information online. They look for information more on YouTube than they look for information on Google, for example. And one of those, just a couple of examples, are that some of the leading proponents or opponents of gender equality, or those who claim gender ideology is a bad thing, they could have 60,000 views per video. And one of the most successful video that demonizes gender equality and that mocks basically the concept of gender equality from one leading neo-Nazi Instagrammer, I would call her, has around 500,000 views. It is not a small number. And it has real consequences, one of which was that Slovakia did not sign the so-called Istanbul Convention. Because the public pressure, it was not the whole society pressure, of course, but the voices were loud enough and the counter voices were not loud enough, so that they persuaded politicians just to put their hands off of the convention. There's plenty other examples, such as Ms. Holubova already mentioned. There's been, and I didn't know the number myself, I couldn't count it, there's been 19 attempts to curb the access of women to reproductive rights. Since September, since a year and a half, I believe, which is an astonishing number of attempts. And interestingly enough, this is happening even if it does not have a public support. This is not something that would be coming out of public polls or that people would consider a problem, and people are not backing these measures up at all. Quite the contrary, the public opinion is that the current legislation is okay, and we don't need to change it. So if we really need to tackle these tendencies, we really need to somehow put stop to it, or to be a counter voice, but also to be realistic. The issues we've seen today, of course, there's been numerous issues. We can't focus on them all in one project. But what we can focus on, or what we can try to focus on, is how do people perceive the topic, and to try to establish a different vision of what gender equality is, or to put out the truth of what gender equality really is, and dismantle the lies on gender ideology for what they are. And these are the pillars of our project, exactly. So the first is a campaign to dismantle the disinformation that is rich and running around on social media, on internet, among influencers and so on. Again, a lot of consumers, I would call them, a lot of people who see such content are confused. It doesn't mean that everybody who thinks there is some gender ideology reigning here knows what they talk about. So part of the problem is lack of information of what is gender equality, and a lot of disbelief, lies, and different perceptions of what people put in the concept. So the first step is really to dismantle the lies. And we will do that by collecting the most common misconceptions and explaining them online in the form of infographics, social media content, and so on. As a second step, we will engage young people via Instagram. We will engage young people in reflecting on their own gender roles. To be more precise for you to imagine how we want to do it, is that we want to invite young people to answer to a question, which gendered prejudice they disliked the most about their gender or in their childhood, or which one is the one they struggled with the most, so that they for themselves, not only girls but also boys, can reflect, okay, what is it that actually I dislike about gender prejudices? What is it that influenced me personally? So it's not some abstract term, abstract ideology, but which element is actually affecting me, was affecting me, and why is it important? and social media content and so on what is gender equality, particular aspects, particular numbers, and two of these will be also dedicated to how does it look like in Norway, what does it mean in Norway, and to draw some comparisons to Slovakia so that we have some content, put some content online out there, promote it and try to reach as broad audiences as possible. Fourth pillar is work at schools. We will, as was mentioned before here, and a discussion also ensued, we will have to be sensitive about this and try to look for cooperation rather than antagonizing the schools in the topic. And we will deliver workshops for schools that are interested to have such a topic at their schools, with a particular focus on marginalized communities where girls and women face intersectional discrimination or discrimination on multiple grounds. Part of this is also creating a small material for schools that we will deliver to schools and to schools that will be easy to download, etc. So the teachers have something short, concise, if they want to speak about gender equality at schools. At least within the framework of this project, it will not really be possible to push through some curricular changes. This takes time, of course. But what teachers often say is that they lack material. Even if in these topics there is already quite some. There's been NGOs who've done great things, that it's hard to match demand to supply sometimes, so that they don't know where to look for it, don't have time where to look for it. So also based on the campaigns I was just mentioning, we will deliver a short toolkit to those teachers who want that. We will also ask the schools and contact schools with this offer. And last and not least pillar of this project is Norwegian cooperation, or transfer of know-how from Norway to Slovakia. Obviously, this is not to say that everything's perfect in Norway. Arne was already clear to explain, and also Karin, that the work is never done. Nowhere the work is over, but there's been a lot of progress done that we've heard today, and a lot of experience that's been already tried that we believe could be beneficial also for us, to not to invent the wheel, but also to get inspired. And this transfer of know-how, I believe, will be fruitful for us in terms of consultation with Norway, and this conference is the first step in that direction. If you have any questions for the project or any other now, feel free to ask me, or later on. As part of the project, I invite you tomorrow to join us for a discussion. It's going to be a public discussion, also streamed via our social media, and it will take place at 7 o'clock in the evening, 7 p.m. in the cultural space KC Dunaj, that local people will know, and where Arne and Karin will speak, but in a different setting with a different moderator, and really answering more questions about what might be of interest for general public and not for expert public. So I'm interested to see what kind of questions will arise tomorrow. So if we have time tomorrow at 7 or later, it will be streamed. This discussion is also part of our effort to bring gender equality to the public and gender equality debates. And we will have it on our social media that be available. That's all of it from my side. Thank you very much, all of you, for your participation today. I really hope this conference is a good step in this direction. I really felt today that it's been quite a while I participated at an event or a conference that would be more international in scope. There is a lot of it that is really, you know, like a national, we compare, or maybe in the region, you know, that there's not much. Okay, we can congratulate ourselves in that regard that it's a bit better than in, you know, neighboring countries, but it's not really about bringing good ideas that much, but more about comparisons. There's been plenty of things Slovakia could definitely learn from. What sticks to me is your systematic approach. That's impressive, to say the least, and is something that's really lacking probably even in the psyche and mind of Slovakia, is this solution-oriented approach, that there is a problem, we set up a strategy, we set up an action plan, and we do it. That I would love to see more, and also how you were able to persuade the authorities that this is an important field to invest in, and consequently that the government saw it as an important thing and really you pushed for a thorough implementation with money, not only on paper and on a voluntary basis, but really with consequences. I believe this is the basis for us to do. And the second thing I believe is very important for Slovakia is also to win the public opinion. And for this, we will do what we can with the project we do. Thank you very much, all of you today, for your active participation. For those of you who see us online, thank you for watching us, and follow our social channels, facebook.com ľudské práva, or the website ľudskeprava.com.sk for more information on the project and see you. Thank you.